Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for taking some time to join us. Before we get started, now's kind of a good time to review some of the technical aspects of today's presentation. So if you could, please double check your audio settings on your computer, as well as your speaker volume settings if you're having any audio trouble. If you're still having issues, please see our detailed audio troubleshooting file available in the resource list under the Q&A window below. If your console freezes or hear music after the presentation has begun, please refresh your browser. There's also some other icons that open some additional feature panels in our webinar console below. You can read about today's speakers in the speaker bio window. You can click the resource list to download a copy of today's slides, as well as our webinar guide, which is going to be incredibly valuable for you to utilize for following along with our discussion today, or join the group chat. You can also follow the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter using the hashtag #EWWebinar. We welcome your questions. Please type them in the Q&A box accessible through the tabs located on your console and not into the group chat. Finally, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be available online in the next 24 hours. Both the archive and a free-to-download version of the PowerPoint slides will be accessible through edweek.org, or using the same login as you utilized today. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into how to prepare for digital age learning. My name is Eric Peterson, and I am joined today by Ed Kemnitzler from East Williston High School District, Dr. Andrea Tejador, who is our Bloom Education Strategist, and Emily Cook, who is our VP of Ed from Bloom. Now, as I mentioned, we are from Bloom, which some of you may formally know as Trox or Troxel or Trox plus Tierney, depending on which stage of any of our number of mergers you have joined us on. But mergers and name changes aside, our core values really remain the same. We are a group of former educators who are passionate about what ed tech is able to do for learning outcomes and the impact that it can have on our students. Our individual team is composed of individuals with incredibly diverse backgrounds within an education and are eager to share their unique experience on what really drives instruction. But ultimately, as an organization, we are wholly committed to the well-being of the entire learning community. So a quick note about me before I turn it over to Emily and Andrea to introduce themselves. I am a former middle school writing teacher. After that, I made the transition into school district IT for a number of years. And then I joined Bloom when it was Trox as an account executive in Phoenix, Arizona, where I spent several years working closely with districts in Arizona to develop, deploy, and implement technology initiatives. In my current role, I focus primarily on working with districts around the country to develop customized, sustainable professional learning for all things ed tech related. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Emily and Andrea to make their introductions.
Hi, my name is Emily Cook. I'm the Vice President of Education Services with Bloom, and I'm also a former educator myself, and then moved into this ed tech world as the category manager for STEM and collaborative learning within Bloom, formerly Troxel, where I worked with districts all across the country to help build out more collaborative learning opportunities, STEM makerspace opportunities for students all across the country. So excited now to be leading our education department and developing more advisory services and ongoing professional learning opportunities for the districts and schools that we partner with. Andrea, over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Andrea Tejador. I have recently retired from my role as an assistant superintendent for curriculum, instruction, and technology from a school district in the Hudson Valley in New York State. I was with the district for over a decade and held many different roles. I was an elementary principal. I was the director of innovation and instructional technology, along with being the director for professional learning, just everything. Before I joined the district, I worked for a regional collaborative or cooperative in New York known as a BOCES, and I was the coordinator for a model schools program and distance learning. I started my career in education as an elementary school teacher, and it's exciting now for me to be a part of the Bloom team for education services, and we're really looking at different ways to approach strategic planning and the role that instructional technology plays in that. So I hope that I know that's what this presentation is about today, and I hope you take away some valuable insights. We're also joined by Ed Kemnitzler, and I'm going to kick it over to you, Ed, so you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Andrea. My name is Ed Kemnitzler. I am the Director of Technology and Innovation for the East Williston School District, which is a small school district on Long Island, New York. We have 3 school buildings. We are a proud customer and partner for Bloom. We recently engaged in a service Andrea offered, and we're very happy with what we went through, and we're excited for our future with technology.
Yeah, thank you very much. It wouldn't be an educational presentation without objectives. So by the end of our presentation today, what we're going to share with you today, by the end, you'll be able to use the self-assessment tool, which you can find down below, to identify areas of strength and areas for growth within your organization. We're going to discuss the 9 elements that are included within that framework for digitally responsive educational organizations. And then we're going to identify some action steps to plan for moving towards digital responsiveness. But I think in order to really get into all of that, and before we go any further, we need to really define what is digital age learning.
Absolutely. And I'll kind of start there by talking a little bit about what are we talking about when we talk about digital age learning, and kind of starting with the end in mind. I think that there are 3 really key indicators that we'll see in digital age learning environments. So number 1, it's about sort of what are we asking students to do? What are some of those activities that we'll see in a digital age learning environment? So behaviors and thinking strategies and skills that we will see are common in those kind of environments would be communication, teamwork, perseverance. We know that regardless of what life has for students after graduation, that those are keys to success in both college and career. The second thing that is common in a digital learning environment would be global access. And for us, that means that we want students to have access to digital infrastructure that enable them to participate in learning outside of the walls of their classroom, right? Whether it's partnerships on the other side of town or global connections with experts in other countries or students just like them from other places. And so just being able to leverage technology to enable that global access is super key and important. And then lastly, of course, digital age learning is always student-centered. So that means that we're leveraging technology to ensure that learning is personalized, both from the content perspective, students are learning about what they're interested in learning about, and also from the delivery perspective, that they're learning in a way that works for them. And technology really enables us to do that. So we feel that it's not just about technology for technology's sake, but really technology in order to enable the kind of learning that we know is best for students and for teachers too. So this is the goal, right? These digital age learning environments are good for students, teachers, and really education's impact on the world. And they don't happen by chance. Our goal is to have these digitally responsive learning environments so that the whole organization is structured in a way that this type of innovative learning is planned for and prioritized. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrea to talk about my very favorite quote when it comes to this type of planning.
I love this quote. Disruptive innovation rarely happens by chance. I think we all want to believe that innovation happens in that light bulb moment. And it doesn't happen that way very often. It really, innovation occurs as a part of a strategic plan. Really, you need to take your time, look at your system, understand your system, plan strategically, and map a pathway that allows for agility and responsiveness to the needs of your learning community. As educators, we must prepare all students to live and work in this technology-driven world that is changing all the time. So this imperative is the basis of the vision of educational technology as an enabler of innovation in our schools, and it also serves as a way for us to assess pedagogical innovation and plan changes along 3 specific dimensions: pedagogy, are pedagogical, technological, and organizational. All right, so with the three dimensions, I mentioned before, here they are: organizational, pedagogical, and technological. Digital learning technologies are widely regarded by educational organizations as an enabler of their core mission and vision for quality education. From this perspective, the progression of integration and effective use of digital technologies can have the character of educational innovation. And this implies a process of planning changes that can really help us capitalize on the technologies to use them in these three areas that can make a difference for our teachers, for our students, and for our families. People always ask me, well, what happens? What's it look like if one of these elements or one of these dimensions is out of balance? And an easy one is to look at how districts expand to the needs of the students and what happens with the technology component. So if you load a lot of really new, creative, innovative apps that you find on your system, and you don't have the infrastructure that can support that, you don't have Wi-Fi readily available in all of your classrooms, you don't have broadband that can support that. Now you've got really great applications, you've got really great devices everywhere, but your students can't get through to use them. So that's one example where the technology, if it's out of balance with that pedagogy and also with the organizational expectations of using technology to engage students, you wouldn't be able to be fully responsive to the needs of the students or the teachers in the classroom. But what does this look like systematically? I think, Emily, you have some ideas to share with us.
Actually, I'm going to take this one. So, okay. At first glance, this whole thing looks and feels really, really big. So it kind of helps us to zoom out and look at what we're trying to accomplish through a more practical lens. What can we actually be able to do? Because the sad reality is that educational organizations aren't traditionally known for being particularly agile. So it really helps to stop and think about what can we practically accomplish and find efficient ways to start moving in that direction. It also helps to really think about it as 4 big activities. If we break things down, it's easier to tackle those. So the first one that we're going to look at is setting clear goals and visions. In a lot of cases, these already exist within your school or your district or your organization. Essentially, what do you want education to look and feel like within your organization? From there, we move on to collecting objective data. Once we have the visions and goals designed, we need to think about how to strategically put those into practice. So as a former teacher myself, I believe that everything is about letting your assessment drive instruction. So in the same way here, we need to collect objective data to gain an understanding of what is really happening out there. Is the goal and vision of the district actually being communicated effectively and acted upon, and not just at the highest level, but site by site and even down to classroom by classroom? Or is there a complete disconnect? Collecting data is extremely important if we want the following steps to be effective. From there, we move on to prioritize. The objective data is going to give us a ton of information, but we need to prioritize it. We need to review it and establish a list of what we feel is most important, because trying to do it all at once is incredibly unrealistic. So we really need to objectively look at the data and ask ourselves, now what? What's the biggest priority we can spend our time focusing on? And then from there, we can move on to actually creating that strategic plan. And at the end of the day, all of the work put in on the front to establish that vision and execute those goals will not, it won't only lead to a return on investment, which is something that we talk about so much right now, especially considering people are dealing with budgets that are unlike any other budgets that they've dealt with before. So something that we as Bloom spend a ton of time talking about is ensuring how to get a return on the investment, not only from the financial standpoint, but also a return on instruction. We really want to take it the next step further. And how does it actually look different after you make that investment? But at the end, none of it matters if you're not impacting learning. At the end of the day, you can have the best infrastructure, the best technology, all the coolest gizmos and gadgets in the classroom. But if it's not really impacting student learning, then it's really all for nothing. Those are the sort of tangible activities. And we're going to start digging a bit more into those today to sort of look at this framework that we can use to help us judge where we are, how do we collect that data, and then how do we go on to establish those priorities.
Awesome. And so Ed, as you've met earlier on this presentation, is someone that we've worked with and done some of this work alongside. So Andrea, I know, worked most closely, so I'll let you give him the warm introduction, Andrea. Uh-oh, it looks like we can't hear you, though. Can we see in the chat how many of you have talked on mute today?
Please. So no, it was a fantastic experience working with Ed with his school district, the East Williston School District on Long Island, and he's doing some really creative and innovative things with technology, but also with everything that around that, instruction, professional development, and really engaging his teachers in the process. So I'm excited that he's here to share his experience with you.
Thank you. So Eric makes a great point about the return on investment, return on instruction. And in East Williston, our budget is never closed for technology. Whatever we need, we buy. And whatever's good for kids instructionally and learning, we purchase. So over the years, it's just been, oh, you want that? Yeah, looks great. Let's buy it. Oh, that tool seems great. Let's buy it. Even though we have something similar, let's add it. And we're at a point now where Andrea came in at the perfect time with the solution, because we start to ask those questions. Well, we've invested so much money in STEAM. We've invested a lot of staffing and additional money in our K through 12 engineering program. And is it all about the shine, or is it a situation where kids are benefiting and their learning is being maximized? So while we were authoring our 3-year New York State technology plan, it's so easy to see things from our perspective and say, yeah, it's working and it's great. And when you walk in the classrooms, every Chromebook's open and every teacher is using technology. But the service that we received from Troxel and Bloom was eye-opening because from the beginning to end, our teaching staff members were surveyed, our administrators were surveyed about our technology program, and all the things that we thought were going well are going well, but there were some gaps. And it's sometimes really hard to see those gaps when you live something every day. So the outside influence and perspective was just really a game changer. And to bring back data and to bring back evidence to the technology committee that's made up of parents and teachers and administrators to say, look, this is the feedback and the voice that we received. Let's take a look at this. So we established 4 goals for our tech plan, 2 of which weren't on my radar. They weren't something that I was considering until the service offered through Bloom and that report that Andrew provided, which was so in depth and so detailed and easy to read. And it was easy to give it out at a tech committee meeting and quickly go through it together. So I really feel like districts that have budgets like we do, that are very freeing and whatever's good, you can go ahead and buy. The pros of that is we buy things. The cons of that, sometimes we buy too much. And the opposite, we have districts on Long Island that you have to prove to the last degree that you may need something to get the money. So for those districts, I think this service is equally as important, because that outside look into the data, to what's going on, the programs, and the whole picture will allow those districts to provide evidence for purchase, for that return on investment, for that return on instruction. And it's interesting enough, this is the first year that our financial advisory committee joined the educational advisory committee to look at the money we're spending on each program to see that in the end. So I'm feeling very confident and excited to move forward with our technology planning. And a lot of that has to do with the document and the service that was offered through Bloom.
Ed, thanks so much. It was really a pleasure to work with you. And we look at this as a partnership with the district. We really want to identify where there's bright spots in your current operations and then where there's opportunities for growth, because we all have space for that in our systems. So it was really just wonderful to see everything that's happening at East Williston and to know that, yeah, we're doing great stuff, but where can we fine tune this and how can we grow it further? So it was really wonderful. I'm going to move on because this plays a big role in what it means to be a digitally responsive education organization.
Absolutely. And I think what we're going to spend really the bulk of the rest of the time today is giving everybody that's here on this call today kind of a sneak preview and really some practical examples of what that service looks like. So you can do this on your own too. So you will, as Eric mentioned a couple of times, there's a resource guide. There's also a link to it in the group chat that you can go to, but there are going to be some opportunities for you to work alongside and sort of do some self-reflection. Obviously, you're not going to survey your whole staff while we're on this webinar today, but it will give you a little bit of a sense of maybe what your bright spots and areas for focus are based on this framework. So this is the digitally responsive education organization framework that we use when we partner with districts. It really gives us a 360-degree view of what's going on with the organization as a whole. And you'll see it's not just about technology, right? It's about how is the organization functioning entirely. And then, of course, we can help with technology planning to support where you have needs and opportunities. But really, it's about each of these different parts of what makes up a digitally responsive educational organization. So you'll see we have some self-reflection questions as we go through today. But before we go much further, I want to just do a quick self-assessment. As you look through these elements of a digitally responsive organization, are there areas that just stick out to you right away as possible pain points? I would love to have you do this quick poll question. So the 9 parts of the framework are leadership and governance. Let's see. I want to make sure that you're seeing the right slide. Leadership and governance, teaching and learning, professional learning, assessment practices, content and curricula, collaboration and partnerships, infrastructure, well-being and inclusion, and safety and security. So go ahead and just take a moment, select whichever one sticks out to you as, oh boy, I know within my school or my district that there's an area that we're working on or focused on or that is a pain point for us right now. And that'll give us a good insight as we go through these topics today, where we should really zoom in especially. I'll give you about 10 more seconds and then we'll take a peek at the results. All right, let's check it out. Thanks for sharing. Very interesting. Very interesting. Teaching and learning. Good, my favorite. Perfect. So let's jump in. We're going to go through one at a time. We will jump in. Hopefully everyone had a chance to see those results or enter your own results. And we're going to go ahead and jump into the first one, that leadership and governance piece with Andrea. Oh, Andrea, mute again.
Did it again. Okay. So there are 9 elements to the framework for digitally responsive education organization. And I don't think any framework would be complete if we didn't include leadership and governance in that framework. And this element refers to the role of leadership in the organization in terms of integration and effective use of digital technologies in respect of its teaching and learning mission and activities. The organization's strategic planning process should encompass digital learning technologies, and these in turn should be the cornerstone of a well-designed and well-communicated long-term education vision. That vision needs to be visible in everything that you do, and it needs to be supported through leadership and governance and articulated both in short and medium-term strategic plans. The educators, how educators are using technologies, and it should include specific goals and objectives in relation to embedding these into the district and in your classrooms across the board. Some of the questions we ask ourselves are listed there, the descriptors, but your vision and mission should permeate everything you do and the structures you have in place to accomplish this need. You need to be agile and responsive to all areas of your organization. And so take 30 seconds or 10 seconds and just, look at the descriptors. They're in the webinar guide, and you can just, jot down, do you strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree? So in addition to the descriptors for leadership and governance, we also look at the indicators in this area. Technology in and of itself does not move schools towards deeper learning. These indicators can be translated into questions you need to ask yourself as a leader. How are your vision for learning and technology translated into concrete day-to-day practices for learning and teaching? Do you have a system in place that supports a continuous cycle for improvement? Do you reflect and reevaluate? What stakeholders are involved in the process? Are the stakeholders representative of your learning community? That's key. You need to have that representation. As Ed said, he has parents, teachers, he's involved, his financial folks. They need to be involved in that decision making. And do you have the support of your learning community? Again, all stakeholders for both end goals and the process necessary to accomplish them. So as we go through on the webinar guide, in addition to, we're taking a deep dive into three of the 9 elements of the framework. And this is one of them. We've included a reflection question there. And this is certainly a guide that we hope that you can take back to your communities and use them with your colleagues. But for a reflection question, do you have more agrees or disagrees first on your self-assessment? And what evidence do you have that this is the case? What is the one thing you could do tomorrow to gather evidence in response to this reflection question? And so this is the first element that we take a look at. And of course, this is very closely related to teaching and learning. So how are we supporting teaching and learning as leaders? Emily, it's up to you.
Thanks. Absolutely. And just a reminder, we absolutely welcome Q&A. There will be time at the end, but if you have any questions as we're talking, feel free to put those into the Q&A box, and we will be happy to answer those as we go. So teaching and learning, personally, my favorite element. I get the most excited about this. This, of course, relates to that digital age learning conversation a few moments ago that we were talking about. And so digitally responsive organizations use their technology to enhance teaching and learning practices. That includes how do students and staff use innovative practices for learning by using digital learning technologies in diverse ways. This is what we do, right? Hopefully, it's what's happening now. So if you peek at that webinar guide, this is one of the sections that we planned to have you sort of do on your own time and take back with maybe site leadership or teachers to look at kind of that reflection piece. So we're not going to take time to do that now, but in your webinar guide, it's all there. So you can guide your colleagues and yourself through that. But some indicators to look for when we're talking about teaching and learning, we will get to on the next slide here. Ooh, I'm so sorry. Eric, I tried to steal your professional learning thunder. I got too excited. So some of the indicators you'll see in your webinar guide, I am going to pass it over to Eric rather than stealing his thunder and let him talk a little bit about professional learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Professional learning it's actually an area of passion for so many of us here at Bloom, but especially myself, Emily, and Andrea, since we are all former educators. But also because teachers right now are so incredibly overwhelmed and stretched thin as a result of the past few years. So it's really a delicate balance. How do we support teachers without having it feel like, hey, here's another thing to add to your plate. Hope you enjoy. They're already experiencing this technology overload. So how can we provide professional development, professional learning that actually feels supportive in nature, but also that feels well-timed, planned, and thoughtfully chosen. Something that's relevant to what they're currently experiencing in the classroom related to their technology. So this one, I'm actually going to give you some time to complete that webinar guide. So go ahead, do that self-reflection to see where you land in your individual perspective on professional learning. So some of the indicators that, actually, hopefully filling out that self-reflection guide, it gives you some areas that you can think of in terms of what is systematically happening and then how we can build on that. Think about what's going well and then what are some areas for growth. So some of the tangible indicators of a strong professional learning are when the organization facilitates and invests in continuous, comprehensive, and customized professional learning. Basically, it needs to be ongoing and varied. Think of it as this push and pull, where we want to have it ongoing so that we always have something available to the teachers if we're trying to kick off a new initiative or enhance, refine, or maintain skills for existing teachers. So surely anyone who's been a teacher has been sent to some sort of workshop or training only to really never hear about it again. Well, it may be immediately effective. It really falls off quickly, and the actual impact is ultimately diminished as a result of the fact of it not being ongoing. We need to check back in and build that long-term support. But just as importantly, it needs to be varied. We need to ensure that we're not attempting to provide a one-size-fits-all learning opportunity for every single teacher. Just like in the classroom, what works for one may not always work for the other. We need to account for varied learning styles to ensure maximum effectiveness. But the overall goal here is to really develop and integrate new modes of teaching and learning that harness digital learning technologies that ultimately achieve a more comprehensive learning outcome. Learning organizations really need to focus particularly on building those capabilities in digital pedagogy among the staff who are directly engaged with students and those who are involved at an academic or leadership level, managerial or perhaps curriculum roles.
Eric, I'm just going to join you for 1 second here because I couldn't resist on this professional learning slide. But just to share, one of the things that we really differentiate a lot at least in our organization and with our professional development team, is the difference between training and professional development. When there's such an influx of new technology, there is, of course, a need and a desire to make sure that teachers are trained on how to, right? And I'm sure Ed's thinking like, yes, we've done a lot of this. There's a lot of, we have the new thing. Everyone needs to know how to use the new thing. That's training. And that is absolutely like baseline non-negotiable. But what we're talking about is that professional growth, development, learning. So now you know how to use the thing, but why? What is that going to do for the teaching and learning in the classroom? And so just having that, even within our organization, it's been so important to like separate out the language that we use, because it really does mean something different. And being able to support our educators on both sides of that is really crucially important. And also just remembering that training alone is not professional development. It's very different. That professional learning needs to be integrated and needs to be instructionally and really student outcome focused. I couldn't help myself, Eric.
And no. And to kind of piggyback off of that as well, it can't just be a one-time thing. Technology takes quite a while to integrate and for people to become comfortable with it. So to provide a professional development on a mass deployment of new technology once and then walk away from it and forget it, there's going to be turnover. There's going to be teachers who need that refresher. So making sure that we're maintaining that professional development on that technology, as long as that technology is available within the district, so that teachers who may need a refresher have the option in which to do that, or new staff members who come on, they feel supported in what's going to be in their classroom. So Emily is right. There is a stark difference between training and professional development. It's really making sure to understand the difference between those two. But the reflection question for what we're talking about in regard to professional learning within the framework is what we are saying that matters to us represented in our professional learning that is available, or is there a disconnect? How do we qualify that, though? It can be reflected in terms of how PD is scheduled or how it can be accessed. Are you doing it synchronously or asynchronously? Are you doing it online, face-to-face, a hybrid of the two, one time only, large group, small group, one-to-one, etc.? Additionally, are every individual's needs being met? Are we helping the teachers, the TAs, the principals, the district leaders, and so on? So Emily's going to take us through the next step here and start discussing a little bit more in depth on assessment practices.
And before we move on, we have some, what's that?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. We have some questions in the Q&A, and I think it might wrap up our professional learning, but also clarify some things before we continue to go through the framework.
Absolutely.
Can I jump in and grab them?
Please, yes, go for it. Love that.
Awesome. So one of the questions that came in is, how do we define digitally competent? So I think there's, in our framework, you'll see that it's a framework for digitally responsive educational organizations. The research for this framework was based on research that was done in the European Union around digital competence, but it also included our ISTE framework. It also included Cozen's framework for CTOs. So we expanded that, though, because digital competence is more about how to use the technology. Really, it's more about those technical aspects. Are your teachers, is your staff trained on how to use it? It doesn't really go to that next step in terms of responsiveness. Sure, we know how to use the technology, but what data do we have about our students' needs, and how can we leverage the differences in those technologies to really respond to the needs of the students in terms of differentiating content, in terms of differentiating assessment, or in terms of differentiating the delivery of the material. So really looking at it, and what do we know about our learning community? Do we have the tools to do formative assessment? Do we have the tools to really engage them in collaborative learning, whether they're with us or whether they're remote? So what does that look like? So we're looking at, sure, we have to be digitally competent so we can use the technologies, but can we take that one step further and really apply the technologies so they are meeting the needs or responding to the needs of our students? So that's the way we sort of differentiate that. Then we had two questions about professional learning. And one of the questions, research shows that teachers are using technology mainly for word processing, gradebook, and presentation, but not for higher level teaching. Why are we not using the technology more effectively? And Emily and Eric, I think this speaks to your conversation around training versus professional learning. In order to move from where you are in terms of using the technology, do you have those scaffolds built in for your teacher learning, just like you would for your student learning? So once they learn how to use the technology, click here, push that button, do this, turn it on. I mean, that's very important because you don't want to be stuck with not even having to know the basics of using the technology. But then once you have mastered the ins and outs of using it, now can you apply it? Again, have you collected data on your students? Do you know what their needs are? And now can you apply it in those different settings and for your different students' needs?
Well, I think, too, it kind of to boil it down to a single point and not to make it too simplistic, but people aren't using the technology effectively because they don't know how. And there isn't that support structure that's built in there. Another sad reality is that not everybody is technologically competent. I'm sure we all know somebody who raises their hand and almost wears it as a badge of honor, like, hey, I'm really bad with technology. It's like, well, that really can't be a thing that we're proud of anymore because we live in a technological world. It's one of those situations where it's like, if you're bad with it, like, let's get some training to get you up to speed on it. And that kind of segues right into the next question here of what is an example of when something is training and when is it an example of professional learning? The easiest way to discern the difference is training. They come in and they show you how to use the object, just functionally how to use it. Imagine if somebody handed you a computer and said, how do I turn this on? How do I connect it to a projector? How do I shut it off? That's training. They are simply training you how to use it. Professional learning is, how do you use this within an educational realm? How do you design a lesson to maximize the potential of this piece of technology? How do you integrate this into your curriculum? But more importantly, how do you make it so that that piece of technology is not the focal point of the classroom, but rather it facilitates the learning? It becomes a part of the learning instead of the focal point of it. So you need to have that confidence that you can design an engaging lesson utilizing that technology and then differentiate it on the fly.
I love that. Thank you. What great questions. Thank you, those of you that submitted them. Ed, if I know we're all big chatters here on the Bloom side, is there anything you wanted to add to any of that? I would love to hear your perspective on the training versus development versus using, for those higher level things. And then I promise we will move on.
Sure. So I always try to frame it, what are you trying to accomplish with teaching or learning first, right? And then we'll discuss the technology. So I remember when I was an assistant principal, teachers would have kids on the way out of the classroom post these Post-it notes on the door, and that was like the exit ticket. And I used to say, well, what are they doing with these Post-it notes? They're anonymous. How are they really driving learning? What's on there? Can you read the kid's handwriting? And I always use that as like the discussion point, like, well, maybe we need a digital formative assessment tool, right? And then now that we have this tool and we know why we're using it, now let's learn how to actually press the buttons and what to do with that data. So I always try to frame it that way, and then to bring the technology in. As I think Eric mentioned before, it's not about the technology, but it's about the learning. It could have been Emily. So I always think about that. But in terms of professional development, I always feel like it has to be sustained, right? It can't just be come for 2 hours, learn how to use this tool, and then go off and do it. So I always value tech coaches that are in the classes with teachers and they're modeling how to use that technology. They're coming back in, they're working one-on-one, and it's something that professional learning is sustained. So that takes it further away from the hardware or just the tool and really becomes part of like the sustained learning and how that grows over time. So if we're using a formative assessment tool, I may use it as the beginning of the lesson this time, or maybe next lesson's at the end of the lesson, or maybe it's a remedial summary. Whatever that is, it's that growing of expectation. And Eric makes a great point. Listen, the pandemic, never let a crisis go to waste. When the pandemic hit, we start to have those conversations of, you can no longer say I'm not good at technology and I'm not going to use it. Because you never know when another COVID's going to hit. You never know when it's just going to become part of the reality of having kids on the screen and these hybrid environments. We have to be prepared to move forward. So I love that point. So thanks for that opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you. I loved what you said about the embedded coaches, and we're seeing that. That's actually something that we've begun doing. We used to exclusively have a professional development team that would go out. We really try to not do one and done. We really try to do those long-term engagements, but we have found that our educators that we're working with are saying, we don't want to just plan even 3 for the year. Like, what would that look like to have a person from Bloom live within our district and manage this? And that's something that we're seeing more and more, because I think with this huge influx of technology, we need to know that the investments that we're making now are going to actually impact learning for more than the next 6 months, right? It needs to be something that's going to actually make an impact for the next 6 years. So that's something that we're hearing a lot about too. So it's interesting to hear you say that, Ed.
And I also, one last quick thing.
Please.
The rise of cybersecurity issues have really made us realize that maybe one person can't do it all. So if you hire an instructional mind for a director of technology, they may not have that back-end experience. Or if you hire a back-end person, maybe they need instructional support. So if Bloom had that kind of service where the person could come in and assist and be that other half, that would be huge too.
Well, thanks. Yes, that's what's happening. So just we'll kind of buzz through these other sections of the framework quickly. And I think you all get the drill now, right? You have your webinar guide. And so in your own time, you'll be able to look at those pieces for the assessment practices. So that self-reflection piece, where are we on the scale? And then some questions for reflection. So when we're talking about assessment, what we're thinking about is how can assessment actually engage and motivate students, right? we want our assessment, to your point about the Post-its on the door, to be providing timely, targeted feedback. I love that. I mean, if you're not using Google Forms for self-grading assessments, I don't know why. Like, give yourself that time back, man. So, and then of course that the data collected in those assessments are used to inform planning. We all know that, but let's make it as easy on ourselves as possible, leveraging technology versus what I was doing, sitting in front of the TV at night with my extra 4 hours of work to do because I was, needing to do it all by hand. So I think using technology to make it easier on ourselves to use assessment to drive instruction is really what it's all about here. So Andrea, you'll talk a little bit about content for us?
Sure, and that's a great segue into content from curricula, because if you are engaging in assessment practices that give you data on your students, then you can use all of the digital resources that you have to support that content and curricula to really target your students' needs. Again, I'm just going to go through this rapidly. You have the descriptors in your webinar guide that you can self-assess at the end. But I think the key questions for content and curricula is, how often do you review and interpret your curricula? And how often is it updated based on your organization's need? The curricula need to be redesigned and reinterpreted to reflect the pedagogical possibilities afforded by the digital technologies that your district has purchased. One of the things that we look at when we come in and work with districts on strategic planning is, do you have 5 different tools that you can use to collect formative data? Well, if you do, how are they being used? Do they have the usage you'd like to experience? And perhaps there's some redundancies that you can eliminate, and you can really focus on 2 tools instead of 5. So really looking at those redundancies, as well as how you're using the technologies to promote that pedagogical innovation. So I'm going to move on to our next area, which is collaboration and partnerships.
Yeah, I'll take this one here. With this part of the framework, we kind of look at what's happening within our system to ensure that we're connecting our teachers and students internally as well as to external resources. So in a digitally responsive educational organization, we want to make sure that we have a supportive culture of collaboration and communication that really ensures those policies and processes are in place that enable staff and students to engage internally and externally. So it's important to provide the ability to share experiences effectively, but not just within, but also with those who are outside the organizational structures. When we think of digital age learning, we think of relying on a multitude of communication tools. That's not to say we want to lose our traditional ways of communicating, but we want to be able to complement and augment them. So how are we using social media to reach a larger audience? Have we integrated a learning management system into our classrooms so that our resources are readily available to students in a password-protected environment that they can access from anywhere? Do we have digital signage both outside the school as well as inside the school that share the goings-on with the school and what's happening on a day-to-day basis? Also, do we have an active and up-to-date website? Is the information on there relevant? Is it current? And does our organization really use these systems to promote anywhere learning? So again, you have the self-reflection webinar or the webinar guide. Take a couple seconds, pop through that. But some indicators to really look for include within site and district collaboration, community and global partnerships, professional learning communities, and then I guess really important lately is use of social media to engage not just with those professional conversations, but also with the community to keep them up to speed with what's happening within the school. So Andrea is going to kind of take us through the next step here of infrastructure.
Third time's the charm with the mute.
Oh my goodness. I need to use the one on the screen instead of the one on a speaker. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
So I talked in the beginning about what happens when your infrastructure is out of balance. and with so that technological piece is out of balance with your instructional and organizational piece. And this element of the framework refers to the crucial role of infrastructure in enabling and facilitating innovative practices and in extending the boundaries of learning spaces. So we have our physical spaces, but how do we use our technologies to go beyond our physical spaces and really bring in those collaborative partnerships that Eric referenced? So how do we bring that in and connect that virtual space to our physical space, whether it's experts in the field or whether it's students who can't come to school and they're at home? Can our infrastructure support that? So you need a whole organization approach to the innovative design, adaptation, and reorganization of virtual and physical learning spaces, and having that be reflected in the way that the content and curricula are made accessible, but also in making sure that the infrastructure supports all of the learning that you want to have happening in your schools. Emily, how does this fit into what we've been talking about too in terms of well-being? And we have a couple of other ones, but student well-being.
It's huge. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that none of us can stop thinking about and, I hate to say worrying about, but thinking about our student well-being, inclusion, teacher well-being too. I mean, it's just a wild time right now. And so I think this really relates to a lot of the other elements. I'm thinking about how it relates to collaboration and partnerships, how it relates to teaching and learning and professional learning as well. And of course, infrastructure. And importantly, to the last element, the safety and security. But really that well-being and inclusion piece is so crucial to everything that we're doing, making sure that students have access to devices, software, of course, internet, and supports. And support is a really huge, pretty nebulous way to say it, but really it's all sorts of supports that students need, MTSS and PBIS and all of the different ways that we meet the needs of our students. And it's not just technology, but really enabling students to be fully participants in education, no matter who they are, that everybody has equal access. So some of those indicators are, digital citizenship, social emotional learning. We're talking about that endlessly. And I will just say social emotional learning, meaning not only a standalone instruction on social emotional learning, but tying that into everything else that we do. The assistive technology that I mentioned, and just that we're being really proactive about this, that we're not just trying to handle challenges and obstacles as they come up, but that we're actually planning ahead and providing proactive plans and strategies and services and practices for the well-being of our students. It's not just about access to technology. Fortunately, a lot of the funding that's come out, the ECF funding and ESSER funds have allowed for students to have access to technology that maybe they didn't have before, but we need to make sure that they have the skills that they need to access the technology and that their voice is being heard utilizing that technology as well. So you will be able to do that quick self-assessment in your webinar guide. Some of those questions for reflection are around, how are you engaging students and teachers in conversations about their well-being? Do they know that it's even a priority for you or for the leadership at your district? And then what supports do we have in place to really respond and proactively plan for that social and emotional well-being of students? So this is a really huge area for us right now that we want to make sure that we're supporting districts wherever we can to make sure that this is happening, because I think that there are definitely some gaps here in just the capacity, right? Who can take on one more initiative right now. And so making sure that we make it easy for the folks that we work with to tackle this element specifically is really important to all of us. So related, of course, safety and security is a huge part of that. No.
There we go. Right, this goes right along with wellness and inclusion, and are the technologies in place to really make sure that you have a safe, productive learning environment? Measures are in place for the protection of physical safety, like security cameras, door swipes, campus lockdowns. But more than that, are there programmatic and communicative efforts to really share what it is that you're doing for physical safety, for your well-being, and help alleviate the stress, the anxiety, and the fear of your staff. And then that's sort of the physical security, but then we need to look at data security and cybersecurity. So are your teachers also trained in best practices for, keeping student and staff personally identifiable information safe, and that there's no, leak in that data? And then in terms of cybersecurity, do you have training in place on what it looks like if a suspicious email comes in? Are you running phishing campaigns and training your staff on what to look for in malicious emails? And I think the big picture is really, run by planning. Again, that strategic planning that comes into play. Does the district have an incident response plan, a business continuity, a disaster recovery plan? Have you done some tabletop drills around those plans to make sure that they're tight? And do you know what the impact would be if you were taken down? So have you done a business impact analysis if your student information system went down, for example? So these are all really key areas because you want your network to be safe, you want your data to be safe, and you want to be able to make sure that you have physical safety measurements in place as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. So this has been such a fun conversation. It's always nice to chat with you all and with Ed as well. And I really appreciate the questions that have come in through our time today. We probably could talk for another hour on all of this, but in an effort to wrap us up on as close to time as we can, we wanted to just take a moment for one more poll, one more quick question to you. And this one you can answer actually multiple, and I'm going to try not to buzz through it so quickly. So we'll see how it goes. But after taking some time to review each of these sections, is there an area of the framework that you'd be interested in digging into a bit more? Maybe somewhere that you'd like additional information, time to think through next steps. And if you will check those boxes, that would be great.
And while that's happening, Emily, I noticed that somebody put in the Q&A that planning for digital wellness for staff, students, and their families, so important, right? And that's what we're hearing time and again. What's happening around wellness? And what about digital wellness? Are people aware of what that means? That, we're teaching and learning digitally, but we also need to take a break from that screen and go outside and take a walk or engage in other physical activities, whatever it is, but really make space for yourself and a more well-rounded response to your learning.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for responding to that. We will be able to check those after the call today. But if you have any questions, of course, we're here for you. I'll put our contact information up one more time. Before we do that, though, we've actually talked about it a lot. I didn't know that we've talked about it so much throughout our time today, but wanted to just give Andrea a moment to talk about the strategic planning service. I know we've referred to it a lot in terms of what you've done with Ed, but do you want to just give sort of a high level overview? I think there might be some questions about what we're talking about and what's available for that support.
Sure. So we've designed the service, the strategic planning service, around 3 areas of collecting data. The first thing we do is we start with interviews with the technology staff, the technology director, but we like to pair that with interviews from the curricular side as well. And we collect interviews, we collect data through those interviews. In addition, we have a survey that we send out, a survey instrument that looks at all 9 areas of the framework. The survey takes about 15 minutes, and it gives us really great data on what's happening in your district, where things are happening, what it looks like. And then we also take a very deep look at your website and anything that's on that will help us inform your practices as a district. So we look at how you're using social media. Is there a technology plan, a communication plan, a strategic action plan? Because not all states require their districts to submit technology plans any longer, like New York does. And then we take a look at all the information that we've gathered, and we are able to create a technology profile and debrief with those leads that we're in contact with at the district, and pull it all together in a discovery report where we have identified where there's bright spots in your current operation and then where there's opportunities for growth. Once we have that, we are able to map out a 1 to 3 year strategic action plan, a multi-year strategic action plan, and also supports in terms of how do we sustain what we've done. So that's the process. The whole process takes about 8 to 12 weeks, and we work hand in hand with the district, and we're happy to continue the conversation after the plan is done. But many districts at this point have really identified, have very strong technology supports for instructional technology, but we're happy to continue that conversation after the final report is done.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, we are absolutely happy to take 2 more minutes if there are questions that anyone wants us to address, or our email addresses are there. Please feel free to reach out to any of us personally, and we're happy to talk through any of this or provide any additional consultation if you have just a few questions about how it applies to you or your district, and happy to support that work. We're all very passionate about this work, and we feel like it's important, so we're happy to do whatever we can to support you as you continue in this journey towards becoming more digitally responsive. So feel free to grab those email addresses or put any questions in the chat now.
Yeah, I don't see any questions popping in here, but in the meantime, if you'd like to watch today's presentation again, an on-demand archive will be made available through edweek.org or using today's link within the next 24 hours. You can also visit edweek.org to find articles that explore more of today's topics. So thank you all very, very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure being able to share some insight and have these discussions with you today.